The wind that swept across the Norfolk Naval Base carried the sharp bite of salt and steel. It was just after dawn, and the sun crept lazily above the Atlantic, painting streaks of gold over rows of ships docked like sleeping giants. The training compound was already alive with motion. Men shouting, boots striking gravel, the rhythmic thud of bodies hitting the ground in timed push-ups. It was another morning in the life of the SEALs, America's most elite warriors. And into this world walked Commander Elena Ward. She moved with quiet confidence, every step measured, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Her uniform was immaculate, her hair tightly braided, her posture too precise to mistake her for anyone less than exceptional. Yet as she crossed the field, dozens of eyes followed her, some curious, others skeptical, and a few laced with poorly hidden amusement. A woman among them. Even in 2025, the SEALs remained a brotherhood carved from muscle, grit, and tradition. Outsiders, especially female officers, were rarely welcomed with open arms. But Elena wasn't a stranger to cold stares or condescending whispers. She had faced worse in her climb up the ranks. "Commander Ward reporting for duty, sir," she said, her voice steady as she saluted the towering figure before her, Admiral Jack Ross, the legendary SEAL who had served in every major conflict of the last 3 decades. His reputation was carved in stone, brutal, brilliant, and utterly intolerant of weakness. Ross turned to her, his weathered face splitting into a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Commander Ward," he said slowly, drawing out her name like a challenge. "You're the one they sent to observe SEAL operations?" "To coordinate fleet readiness," she corrected politely. A few officers standing behind him exchanged smirks. One of them muttered, "Fleet readiness, huh? Maybe she's here to reorganize our filing system." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough to echo. Ross chuckled. "Careful, Commander. Out here, we don't salute PowerPoint slides." Elena didn't flinch. "Good," she replied evenly, "because I don't write them." That one line shifted the air. It was calm, polite, yet razor-sharp. Ross studied her face for a long moment, his grin fading slightly. Then, with a dismissive nod, he turned away. Let's see how long that confidence lasts. By midday, the sun beat down on the field like a hammer. Sweat poured down faces, boots sank into mud, and commands barked from instructors shattered the silence. The SEAL candidates, all men, all hard as stone, moved in perfect sync, carrying logs, flipping tires, and dragging each other across the training course. "Ward!" Ross's voice roared. Elena turned sharply. "Since you're here to coordinate with my men, why don't you join them for a little warm-up?" His smirk returned. "We wouldn't want Fleet Command thinking we're being soft on our guests." A few snickers rippled through the crowd. Without hesitation, Elena stripped off her jacket, rolled up her sleeves, and stepped into the mud. "Ma'am, that's not necessary," one of the instructors started, but she cut him off with a glance. "Carry on," she said. The next hour was a storm of exertion. The obstacle course was brutal, 12 stations designed to break body and will. Walls to climb, ropes to swing, ditches to crawl through, and weighted runs that tested even the strongest recruits. She didn't outmuscle them. She outlasted them. When her legs burned and her arms screamed in pain, she refused to slow down. Every obstacle she cleared was another silent message to the men watching. A wordless declaration. I belong here. By the time she reached the final sprint, half the men were lagging. Mud streaked her face, her hair was undone, and her uniform clung to her like armor. As she crossed the line, she heard Ross call out, "Not bad for fleet, Commander." Elena, gasping for breath, turned and saluted sharply. "Permission to repeat the course, sir?" Ross's smirk vanished. "Repeat?" "Yes, sir." I believe the Admiral wanted to see how long my confidence would last. The field went quiet. Without waiting for an answer, she started back toward the first obstacle. The men stared as she went again, slower this time, but still steady, deliberate, relentless. When she finally finished, nearly an hour later, she stood tall, drenched in sweat and mud, but her salute remained unwavering. Ross approached, his boots squelching in the wet dirt. He studied her face, tired but unbroken, and gave a short nod. "You're either insane or stubborn." "Both, sir," she said with the faintest smile. That night, the base was quiet. The sound of the waves outside the barracks was steady, soothing, but inside her quarters, Elena sat at her desk, her uniform neatly folded beside her. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured water into a tin cup. She was exhausted, every muscle aching, every breath a reminder of how much she had pushed herself. But she wasn't angry. She was patient. She knew how men like Ross worked, how they tested, mocked, and measured anyone who didn't fit the mold. Respect in their world wasn't given. It was earned, inch by inch, drop by drop. She glanced at the framed photo sitting on her desk. Her father in uniform, smiling proudly on the day he'd pinned her first naval insignia. He'd died 3 years later during a classified operation. He'd told her once, "If they doubt you, let your results speak louder than your voice." That memory steadied her. She opened her notebook, jotting down the next day's schedule, reviewing SEAL readiness reports, and mapping training overlaps with Fleet Command. Her mind didn't rest. Her mission wasn't to prove herself. It was to prepare them. And she wasn't going to let bruised egos or outdated jokes derail that. Outside, she could hear distant laughter, the SEALs in their barracks swapping stories, probably including jokes about her mud show. She smiled faintly. Let them talk. Tomorrow, they'd see more than a fleet officer in boots. They'd see someone who understood their world, and maybe, just maybe, someone who could lead it. At dawn, she stood once more on the field. The air was colder, the sky dimmer. Ross arrived late, coffee mug in hand, eyes curious. "Back again, Commander?" "Yes, sir," she said, her tone respectful. "You mentioned readiness tests. I'd like to review them with your team firsthand." He raised an eyebrow. "You never quit, do you?" "No, sir. Not until the job's done." Ross chuckled, shaking his head. "You remind me of someone I used to know. Yourself?" she asked. That earned a real laugh. For the first time, Ross didn't see a challenge standing before him. He saw a reflection of the same fire that had driven him years ago. The men still doubted, still whispered, but something subtle had shifted. When Elena spoke, they listened. When she walked past, the jokes quieted. Respect hadn't arrived yet, but the walls of prejudice had begun to crack. As the sun rose over the base, casting gold on her uniform, she stood silently watching the training drills. The wind caught her hair, and for a fleeting moment, she looked less like a visitor and more like a commander meant to be there. She didn't need to announce who she was or what she'd accomplished. Her presence said enough. And deep down, Admiral Ross felt a faint, unfamiliar thought that perhaps, for the first time in a long while, he had underestimated someone. The morning sun rose over the Norfolk Naval Base like a sentinel, casting long shadows across the mud-streaked obstacle course. Commander Elena Ward tightened her boots, feeling the familiar sting of anticipation. Yesterday had been a storm of whispers, smirks, and silent measurements, and today promised no less. She knew the men were still watching, waiting for her to falter, to reveal that the veneer of composure was just that, thin, fragile, human. Admiral Ross, ever the master of provocation, stood near the starting line, arms crossed, a sardonic grin on his face. "Today, Commander," he said, his voice carrying across the field, you'll face the real SEAL Endurance Challenge. Only one shot. Don't embarrass Fleet Command." A ripple of laughter ran through the recruits. Some muttered jokes under their breath. Others nudged each other, eyes flicking toward Elena, as if expecting her to stumble before the first obstacle. She didn't react. She simply nodded and stepped forward. The first station was the wall climb, a 12-foot vertical challenge, slick from early morning dew. Elena wrapped her fingers around the rope, muscles coiling as she launched herself upward. Her boots scraped against the wooden slats, mud clinging to her uniform, but she reached the top with grace. 1 down, 11 to go. Behind her, the men hesitated as they sized her up. She wasn't taller than most of them, not heavier, not visibly stronger. But the way she moved, deliberate, unwavering, precise, was something entirely unfamiliar to the crew. Confidence wasn't always shown in brute strength. Sometimes it was quiet, almost invisible, until it became impossible to ignore. By the time she reached the tire flip station, a few of the men had already faltered, breath ragged, bodies shaking. Elena approached the first tire, placed her hands firmly, and pushed. 1, 2, 3 flips. Her legs quivered, sweat pouring down her face, but she didn't pause. The second tire was heavier, coated in sticky mud. A grunt escaped her lips as she heaved it across the line. Every flip drew a few widened eyes, some whispers of astonishment. Ross's smirk remained, but the gleam in his eyes had shifted. Curiosity now mingled with a reluctant respect. He muttered to one of the instructors, "She's holding her own," against them. The course grew more brutal with each station. Rope climbs that burned her shoulders. Crawling through ditches filled with cold, muddy water. Weighted runs that tested the very core of her endurance. Through it all, Elena kept her rhythm, her breathing controlled, her focus unwavering. She wasn't just completing the course. She was demonstrating a principle she had learned over years of relentless training. Grit was forged in repetition, not grandstanding. When a recruit fell face first into the mud after misjudging a jump, Elena didn't pause. She swung back, lifted him to his feet, and barked instructions on balance and form. Keep your core tight, eyes forward. Don't fight the momentum, use it. Her voice was calm, commanding yet encouraging. For the first time, some of the men noticed. This wasn't just endurance. This was leadership. By the midpoint, sweat clung to her like a second skin, mud streaked her face, and her uniform was nearly unrecognizable. But the fire in her eyes burned brighter than ever. She moved past the doubters, past the laughter, past the expectation of failure, and forged a path that no one had expected her to tread. Halfway through, Ross finally spoke again, more to himself than anyone else. "She's uncheckable. I didn't see that coming." Elena heard him, of course, but she didn't let it alter her pace. She had long since learned that admiration from skeptics was not earned through words, but through unrelenting action. Each obstacle was a statement. Each step was a declaration. I belong. I have earned this. The final station loomed ahead, a grueling combination of monkey bars, rope climbs, and a sprint to the finish. Her arms burned like fire. Her lungs screamed with every breath. Every fiber of her being demanded rest. And yet, she pushed on, summoning strength from the memory of her father, from the countless early mornings and sleepless nights, from the knowledge that this was more than a test of endurance. It was a test of perception, of respect, of breaking walls that had been built over centuries. She swung across the monkey bars, the muscles in her forearms straining until they threatened to snap. She climbed the rope with precision, ignoring the sting in her fingertips. And when she finally touched the ground for the final sprint, she propelled herself forward with every ounce of energy left, crossing the finish line first. Silence fell. The recruits, the instructors, and even Ross stared, unblinking. The laughter, the jokes, the whispered doubts, all vanished. Elena's chest rose and fell rapidly, but her salute remained perfect. Ross approached, boots crunching in the mud. He studied her face, exhausted, dirty, yet triumphant. "You're either completely insane or impressively stubborn," he said. "Both, sir," she replied, voice steady despite her exhaustion. For a moment, Ross said nothing. Then he turned away, muttering something about needing coffee and reviewing fleet readiness reports. But he didn't look back at her with the same casual arrogance. Something had shifted. Respect, tentative and reluctant, had begun to root. The men, too, whispered among themselves, some in awe, others in disbelief. A few of the older recruits, hardened by years of grueling training, admitted silently that she had done what few could. And more importantly, she had done it with humility, never bragging, never challenging, just leading by example. By the time night fell, the base was quiet, save for the soft hum of generators and the distant call of the ocean. Elena sat in, her quarters, legs aching, body soaked and sore, yet her mind was active, sharp, and relentless. She poured water into a cup, watching it tremble in her hands, and allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She thought of her father, who had once told her, "Strength is nothing without endurance. Leadership is nothing without courage." She had internalized that wisdom, letting it guide her every decision. Every push-up, every mud-caked step, every careful calculation had been a tribute, not to herself, but to the men she would one day lead, the fleet she would protect, and the legacy she wished to honor. Outside, laughter echoed from the barracks. The men swapped stories, some still ridiculing the commander who had just outrun them all. She smiled faintly. Let them talk. Tomorrow, they would see more than endurance. They would witness strategic thinking, empathy, and decisiveness. And when that day came, respect would no longer be optional. She laid out her notes for tomorrow, reviewing SEAL readiness reports, plotting obstacle training improvements, and planning operational coordination with Fleet Command. Her body was tired, but her mind was alert. Exhaustion was temporary. Discipline was permanent. The wind carried a chill through the window, ruffling her hair. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing in the scent of the sea and the faint metallic tang of the base. She whispered to herself, "They'll understand soon enough. Not because I demand it, because I earned it." At dawn, she would return to the field, boots laced, uniform tight, eyes sharp. The men would watch. Ross would watch. And they would see something that no test could manufacture. A leader forged through perseverance, courage, and unwavering resolve. That was her mission. That was her promise. And Commander Elena Ward would not break. The morning had begun like any other on the Norfolk Naval Base. Sailors and SEALs moved with mechanical precision, the rhythm of routine embedding itself into the steel and concrete of the facility. Commander Elena Ward reviewed the day's reports, her mind still running through every drill, obstacle, and training evaluation from the previous days. She was meticulous in her planning, knowing that in the Navy, mistakes could be measured not just in dollars or time, but in lives. Her quiet focus was shattered by the shrill ring of the emergency alert system. A loudspeaker crackled, the voice formal but urgent. All personnel attention. Fleet operation near Guam was compromised. Communications lost. Command authority to be established immediately. Elena's eyes sharpened. The alert wasn't vague. It was precise, serious. Somewhere in the Pacific, an entire naval fleet ships, SEAL teams, and allied units was suddenly out of contact. Every second without a coordinated response increased the risk of disaster. By the time she reached the command center, the room was chaos incarnate. Officers barked orders over phones. fumbled with encrypted communications, and argued over jurisdiction. The tension was palpable. Every person in the room understood the stakes. Ross, naturally, was at the center, his voice commanding and sharp, trying to impose control over an unraveling situation. Elena stepped forward, calm and composed. "Sir," she said, addressing Ross, "may I have operational command of the coordination efforts?" A few heads turned. Murmurs ran through the room. Some officers exchanged skeptical glances. Even Ross raised an eyebrow, a sardonic grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You? Here?" he said, disbelief dripping from every word. "This is a field operation. You're a fleet officer. We're talking about active engagement, hostile waters, potential loss of life. Not planning exercises in a conference room." Elena didn't flinch. "With respect, sir, I've been assigned to Fleet Command. I am authorized to coordinate operations and ensure the safety and effectiveness of all deployed units. I can't fight on the deck, but I can direct the mission and prevent unnecessary casualties." Ross's grin faded. He paused, eyes narrowing. He had seen officers argue their way into positions before, but her tone, steady, unyielding, composed, carried authority. It was more than confidence. It was preparation. "Fine," Ross said finally. "Show me what you've got." Elena immediately set to work. Maps were spread across tables, satellite imagery displayed on screens, and the status of every unit was logged meticulously. Her fingers moved rapidly across communication consoles, establishing contact attempts with SEAL teams, fleet ships, and air support units. Every call she made, every order she relayed, carried a sense of precision born from experience and discipline. "Red team, status?" she called. A young officer responded, voice shaky. "Command, our communications are down. We have visual confirmation of multiple hostile vessels approaching. SEAL insertion compromised." Elena nodded, her mind racing. She didn't panic. Panic never solved anything. Deploy reconnaissance drones immediately. Establish secure relay. Do not engage until I provide coordinates for extraction and containment. "Copy?" "Yes, ma'am," came the response. Across the room, Ross observed silently, a faint tension in his jaw. He had underestimated her. Not her rank, that was clear, but her ability to operate under pressure. Elena didn't just plan. She anticipated. Every possibility, every contingency was already considered. Hours passed. The crisis deepened. Initial reports indicated that the fleet had encountered a network of hostile pirate ships and rogue drones, possibly acting with external support. The situation was deteriorating quickly. Lives were at stake. Elena moved among the officers, her calm presence imposing order in the chaos. She issued commands, reassigned units, and restructured communication protocols in real time. She was a conductor of a symphony of chaos, each note precise, each movement deliberate. By mid-morning, the initial panic had shifted to methodical preparation. Ross, for the first time, stayed quiet. He watched as she coordinated simultaneous operations across hundreds of miles, her voice unwavering, her decisions crisp. His ego, long accustomed to command and unquestioned authority, met a force it hadn't reckoned with: competence. Then came the critical moment. A SEAL insertion team reported encountering a heavily armed enemy vessel. They were pinned low on ammo, communications erratic. Ross started to give a counterorder, instinctively. But Elena's voice cut through, calm yet unyielding. "Hold position. Maintain cover. I have an extraction plan. Trust me." The room went silent. Officers exchanged worried glances, but no one dared interrupt. Elena's plan was already in motion. Drones provided live visuals, Air support redirected to neutralize the hostile flanks, and the fleet adjusted its formation to create a safe corridor for extraction. Every move was precise, timed to the second. Minutes felt like hours. And then, the first visual feed showed the SEAL team breaking free from the enemy trap, moving toward safety. Ross leaned back slightly, eyes wide. The impossible had been achieved, without unnecessary loss of life. When communications were finally restored, the magnitude of the operation became clear. Elena had not just stabilized the crisis. She had orchestrated a coordinated rescue that would become a case study in naval strategy. Messages of relief, gratitude, and astonishment poured in from across the Pacific. Fleet Command was operational again, and the SEAL teams were intact. Ross approached her later, in private. His usual grin was tempered by a rare seriousness. "Ward," he said quietly, "I didn't think you had it in you." "I was wrong." Elena met his gaze evenly. "I only did what the mission required, sir. Lives are more important than pride." A tension lingered between them, a mixture of acknowledgement and reluctant respect. Ross had spent decades as a SEAL, accustomed to testing and mocking those who didn't conform. Yet here was someone who didn't just meet the test. She surpassed it, without theatrics, without ego, without hesitation. The room still buzzed with officers debriefing, making notes, and ensuring the fleet was secure. Elena didn't pause to celebrate. There was always another operation, another mission, another detail that required attention. Her calm determination was a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding her. That evening, she finally sat in her quarters, her body tense but her mind racing. The adrenaline had not fully subsided, yet she allowed herself a single deep breath. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Control your fear. Lead with clarity." She had done that. Today, she had not only coordinated a successful recovery operation, but had also begun to earn a reputation she had long worked for, not through titles or appearances, but through competence, courage, and strategic brilliance. Outside her window, the Atlantic waves reflected the setting sun, gold and fire intertwined. The sea had been chaotic and dangerous, yet she had commanded its storm with precision. And in doing so, she had begun to shatter the doubts that lingered around her. Doubts born not of capability, but of old traditions, old assumptions, and the simple fact that she was a woman in a world dominated by men. Ross's earlier skepticism had already begun to fade in the silent corridors of the command center. Some of the younger officers whispered among themselves, impressed by her poise and foresight. Others, hardened veterans, studied her in quiet contemplation, recognizing a rare combination of intellect, leadership, and courage. Elena allowed herself a faint smile. This was just the beginning. The challenges ahead would test her further, demanding not just strategy and endurance, but diplomacy, patience, and sometimes the courage to defy those who doubted her. She knew deep down that the true test of leadership was not just surviving chaos, but shaping it, guiding it, and leaving it better than it had been found. And today, she had done exactly that. As night descended on the base, she looked at the operational map one last time. The fleet was safe, the SEAL teams accounted for, and the enemy neutralized. Yet her mind remained active, plotting, calculating, anticipating the next mission. Because leadership, she understood, never rested. Tomorrow would come with new challenges, new skeptics, and new opportunities. But tonight, she allowed herself one small truth. She had faced the storm and emerged not just unbroken, but stronger. And the world, or at least the small corner of it she had just commanded, had taken notice. The command center buzzed with activity, screens flickering with satellite feeds, communications intercepts, and real-time fleet positions. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and electronics, a scent familiar to anyone who had spent a night coordinating chaos. Commander Elena Ward moved among the officers, issuing directives, adjusting coordinates, and monitoring SEAL teams' positions with clinical precision. Every order was crisp, every adjustment measured. It was a symphony of control in a room that had been on the brink of collapse only hours earlier. Admiral Jack Ross observed from the back of the room, arms crossed, brow furrowed. He had spent decades commanding men in the harshest conditions, but something about Elena unsettled him. She was calm where he would have been shouting. She was precise where he would have improvised. Her confidence, quiet yet unshakable, challenged his instincts. "Commander Ward," he said, stepping forward, voice firm but controlled, "we're running into hostile zones faster than anticipated. I recommend redirecting Red Team through Sector Delta. The current path is too risky." Elena didn't flinch. Her fingers hovered over the communication panel for only a moment before she responded. "Sir, with all due respect, redirecting through Delta will expose them to ambush points I've already identified. Maintaining current vector ensures a secure extraction corridor. Trust my calculations." A hush fell over the officers nearby. Ross's jaw tightened. He had expected compliance, or at least hesitation. Instead, Elena's calm certainty challenged him. "Calculations?" He snapped, stepping closer, eyes flashing. "You think you know more than a SEAL veteran who's been in the field for 30 years? "Yes, sir," she replied steadily. "Not because I'm more experienced, but because I have live intelligence, drone feeds, and updated threat assessments. I am making the decision that keeps our team safe." Ross's lips pressed together in a thin line. He looked around the room, searching for support. Some of his officers avoided his gaze. A few nodded subtly toward Elena. Even in her quiet authority, she was gaining silent allies. "You are overstepping," Ross said, voice low, dangerous. "I am executing my mission," Elena replied without hesitation. "The Fleet Command directive is to ensure operational safety and mission success. My orders align with that directive." For a heartbeat, the tension was almost unbearable. The veteran SEALs, accustomed to following the strongest personality, waited to see who would break. Then Elena's calm decisiveness broke the deadlock. Her eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on every officer, every operator, every pilot, and drone technician. Every movement she made communicated clarity and authority. Ross exhaled slowly. His pride bristled, but he could not deny the logic in her plan. The current vector avoided multiple known ambush sites, minimized exposure to drone surveillance, and aligned with friendly support positions. Despite himself, he respected the strategy unfolding before him. The first communication came in from Red Team, their voice tense but audible over the secure channel. "Command, we're approaching the first hostile sector. Enemy vessels detected. Vector holding. Awaiting further instructions." Elena's voice cut through the tension like steel. "Maintain position. Deploy countermeasures. Engage only if fired upon. I am monitoring extraction points. You will be clear in 3 minutes." Seconds stretched into an eternity. The fleet moved as she had directed, slipping between hostile positions like a shadow through a maze. The enemy launched drone probes, and missile systems activated in warning. Elena's eyes didn't flicker. Each command she issued synchronized responses across multiple units, neutralizing threats before they could strike. Ross leaned against a console, fists clenched. He had been trained to lead, to improvise in chaotic situations. And yet, he had never witnessed coordination executed with such surgical precision from someone so young, someone he had dismissed only hours earlier. The first hostile vessel attempted to flank Red Team. Elena anticipated the maneuver. Air support, intercept Vector 5-7. Naval units, adjust to defensive perimeter Alpha. SEALs, maintain cover. Do not engage. Every command was executed flawlessly. The ambush was neutralized before contact could occur. Ross exhaled, eyes wide in disbelief. The calm, deliberate woman he had mocked was not just surviving in his domain, she was controlling it. But the tension wasn't over. The enemy adapted quickly, sending drone swarms and attempting electronic disruption. Some systems went offline briefly. Ross barked. Override command. Push them back. Elena's hand moved quickly across the console. No, sir. Override will expose Red Team. Trust Vector Control Alpha. Engage defensive jamming protocols. I am coordinating countermeasures. Ross's pride rebelled, but he held his tongue. To override her now would jeopardize the lives of the SEALs. Slowly, he realized that he was witnessing a rare form of leadership. Authority without arrogance, precision without ego. Minutes later, the crisis stabilized. Red Team was extracted safely, hostile vessels neutralized or redirected, and the fleet maintained operational integrity. Officers who had doubted her now observed in silent admiration. Ross, however, remained a careful enigma, a mix of respect, disbelief, and lingering skepticism. The room finally exhaled. Elena stepped away from the console, sweat glistening on her brow, mud streaked along her sleeves, her uniform marked with the subtle signs of exertion and focus. She looked at Ross calmly. "Sir," she said, voice even, "mission objectives achieved. No casualties. Fleet integrity maintained. SEAL team safe." Ross stared at her for a long moment. He had spent decades mentoring men, testing their limits, breaking their confidence to forge strength. He had never encountered someone who could challenge his judgment so directly, yet with unwavering respect for the chain of command. You planned for all contingencies," he finally said, voice low. "Even the ones I didn't see coming." "Yes, sir," Elena replied. "That is the responsibility of command. Anticipate, adapt, execute. Lives depend on it." Ross's pride softened slightly, replaced by grudging admiration. He nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. "Not bad, Commander. Not bad at all." Some of the younger officers whispered among themselves, noting the subtle shift in Ross's demeanor. Elena's leadership had been undeniable. She had broken through the wall of skepticism, not by confrontation, but by precision, calm authority, and unrelenting focus. Elena returned to the operational map, checking coordinates, verifying the safety of every unit, and preparing for the next series of missions. She didn't linger in recognition. She never had. Leadership, she understood, was about results, not accolades. Ross stepped aside, watching her. He felt an unfamiliar sensation, the quiet awe that comes from recognizing true competence, especially in someone who refuses to be intimidated by tradition or expectation. He realized something he hadn't admitted in years. Elena Ward was not just capable. She was exceptional. The officers, who had once whispered doubts, now followed her lead without hesitation. Orders were clear, responses immediate, and morale subtly lifted. Respect, that fragile and earned currency, had begun to shift. By nightfall, the fleet was secure, the SEAL teams accounted for, and the command center's atmosphere had transformed from chaos to controlled precision. Elena, exhausted but composed, returned to her quarters, mindful that the next challenge was already waiting. As she sat alone, reviewing notes and after-action reports, she reflected on the day's events. Ross's challenge had been more than a test of skill. It had been a challenge of ego, tradition, and perception. She had faced skepticism and hostility, yet navigated it not with confrontation, but with competence and unwavering calm. Leadership, she realized, was less about dominance and more about earning trust. Today, she had earned it not only from the men she led, but from the Admiral who had doubted her. Tomorrow, new challenges would come. There would be more obstacles, more opportunities for doubt, and more moments that demanded courage. But she was ready, and the walls of prejudice, built over decades, were beginning to crumble. The night air carried the distant hum of the ocean, a reminder that beyond the base lay a vast world of uncertainty, danger, and duty. Elena's thoughts turned outward to the SEAL teams still deployed, the fleet she commanded, and the invisible threads of responsibility she carried. She knew that leadership was measured not in moments of comfort, but in decisions made under pressure, with lives hanging in the balance. Tomorrow, she would continue to prove that strength was not defined by gender, age, or past reputation, but by vision, courage, and the ability to act decisively when it mattered most. And in that knowledge, she found quiet satisfaction. As she turned off the lights and prepared for a brief rest, a single thought lingered. Respect isn't demanded. It is earned. And today, she had earned it in full. The Pacific night was alive with tension. The waves crashed against the hulls of the fleet like relentless percussion, while the wind carried the sharp scent of salt and ozone. Dark clouds shrouded the moon, and streaks of lightning illuminated the horizon in brief, blinding flashes. The fleet, still recovering from the earlier crisis near Guam, moved cautiously through waters where the enemy could strike at any moment. The calm, methodical coordination of daytime had given way to an urgent, unpredictable chaos that demanded precision, courage, and nerves of steel. Commander Elena Ward stood on the bridge of the flagship, her uniform drenched from earlier rain showers, eyes scanning multiple screens displaying live drone feeds, radar sweeps, and SEAL team positions. The soft hum of electronics was punctuated by distant explosions, a signal that hostile forces were testing the fleet's defenses. Her fingers moved swiftly across the communication panel, issuing orders and relaying critical updates to units hundreds of miles apart. Commander, multiple hostile drones inbound on Vector 3 to 7, reported the operations officer, voice tense. They're coordinating an intercept of the transport ships. Deploy defensive countermeasures immediately, Elena replied, voice calm yet commanding. Activate chaff and flares. Air support, intercept Vector 3 to 7. Maintain electronic jamming to disrupt hostile communications. Keep the SEAL teams in cover until clearance is given. Her commands were precise, like a conductor guiding an orchestra of steel, fire, and human determination. Each order synchronized units across the fleet. The enemy drones were neutralized before they could fire, and transport ships adjusted their course to safer waters. Even amidst the chaos, the fleet moved as a cohesive organism, responding to her every directive. From the rear of the bridge, Admiral Ross watched with a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration. He had trained, fought, and commanded men in every imaginable combat scenario. Yet he had never witnessed someone manage a crisis of this magnitude with such calm authority. Her voice, steady and unwavering, cut through the noise and fear. She wasn't just giving orders, she was instilling confidence. The first salvo of missile fire streaked across the horizon, narrowly missing a destroyer. Alarms blared. Explosions rocked the deck, shaking officers off their feet. Amid the chaos, Elena remained composed, issuing immediate corrective commands. All units, adjust evasive maneuvers Alpha 2. Air cover, intercept hostile vectors 6 through 8. Ensure SEAL teams remain in protective zones. Ross could only watch. His instinct was to intervene, to assert control. But every time he opened his mouth, her voice anticipated his move, her calculations already mitigating the threat he would have countered. He realized, painfully, that she was not just competent. She was extraordinary. Minutes later, an enemy vessel attempted to flank the fleet, moving silently in the shadows of the storm. Red Team SEALs, previously deployed for reconnaissance, spotted the ship and reported back. Command, we have visual on enemy flanking vessel. Requesting clearance for engagement. Hold fire, Elena replied firmly. The flanking vector is within range of our air support. Maintain observation and keep the enemy distracted until intercept team arrives. Red team, do not engage directly. Confirm understanding. Yes, ma'am, the team responded. The enemy vessel hesitated, clearly unsure of the sudden, coordinated resistance. Within moments, air support jets streaked across the sky, illuminated by lightning, and neutralized the threat before it could launch. The flanking attempt was thwarted without any unnecessary casualties. Ross swallowed hard. He had underestimated her tactical acumen, just as he had underestimated her earlier endurance and intelligence. The woman he had once dismissed as a mere fleet officer was now orchestrating the survival of hundreds of sailors and SEALs in hostile waters. But the night was far from over. A second wave of enemy drones approached, faster, smarter, and more aggressive. Explosions lit up the horizon as some managed to evade initial countermeasures. Elena's hands were steady, her mind calculating each possibility. Adjust defensive perimeter to Beta 4, she commanded. Activate EMP. Deploy drones for interception. Redirect all ships to evasive formation Gamma. Keep SEAL teams concealed and ready for extraction. The bridge moved like a single organism under her guidance. Every officer, every sailor, every drone operator followed her instructions precisely. The fleet's response was flawless, a testament to her ability to lead not with intimidation, but with clarity and authority. Then came the critical moment. One of the SEAL teams reported being pinned down by enemy fire, their communications erratic. Ross instinctively reached for the override panel, intending to assert command. Elena's voice cut through sharply. Admiral Ross, do not override. Doing so will expose Red Team to enemy fire. I have calculated extraction timing and supporting fire vectors. Trust the plan. For a heartbeat, Ross hesitated. Ego warred with reason, pride with the undeniable fact before him. Then he exhaled slowly and nodded. He would trust her judgment, even if it meant swallowing his pride. The SEAL team was extracted with precision, guided by her real-time coordination and the fleet's flawless execution. The hostile drones were neutralized, enemy vessels either destroyed or forced into retreat. Within the span of an hour, the fleet had survived a potentially devastating assault. The bridge erupted into cautious relief, but Elena remained calm, issuing final commands to secure positions, assess damage, and account for every sailor. Her face was streaked with rain and sweat, yet her eyes burned with unyielding focus. Ross approached her quietly. "Ward," he said, voice low, carrying both awe and humility, "I have to admit, that was extraordinary. I've never seen anyone command under fire like that. Not even myself." Elena met his gaze evenly. "Sir, we all followed procedure. We all acted to protect lives. That's the mission. My responsibility is to coordinate, not to take credit." Ross nodded, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them. For the first time, he saw her not just as a fleet officer or a young commander, but as a leader who had earned authority through action, not title. Outside the bridge, the fleet began to stabilize. Communications were restored, ships regained formation, and SEAL teams reported back safely. The ocean, once chaotic and threatening, now mirrored the calm determination of the commander guiding it. Elena finally allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, reviewing status reports and confirming that every unit was accounted for. She thought of the men who had doubted her, the whispers, the jokes, the expectations of failure. Tonight, every one of them had witnessed her leadership in action. The storm clouds began to part, revealing the faint glow of dawn over the Pacific. The sky, painted in streaks of gold and crimson, reflected the hard-won triumph of the night. Elena stood silently on the bridge, letting the cool morning air wash over her. Her uniform soaked, but her resolve intact. Ross lingered beside her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said quietly, almost to himself, "You didn't just survive. You commanded." "Yes, sir," Elena replied, voice steady, eyes scanning the horizon. "Because that is what command is. Lives depend on it." The fleet moved on, intact and operational, a testament to her unwavering focus and decisiveness. Officers who had doubted her began to understand the depth of her skill, the power of her calm under fire, and the rare blend of intelligence and courage that defined her leadership. As the sun rose fully over the horizon, painting the ships in a golden light, Elena allowed herself the slightest fleeting smile. The night had been brutal, filled with fire, chaos, and uncertainty. But she had emerged not only unbroken, but victorious. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that this was only the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of leadership, and new opportunities to prove that respect and authority are not claimed, they are earned. And tonight, for the first time, Admiral Ross understood that she had earned it in full. The early morning light spilled over the deck of the flagship, glinting off metal and water as the fleet navigated the open Pacific. Calm had returned to the waters, but Commander Elena Ward knew better than to trust appearances. In naval operations, a moment of complacency could be deadly. Her eyes scanned the horizon, checking drone feeds, radar signals, and communications logs. Every second demanded vigilance. Every oversight could cost lives. Admiral Ross entered the command center, expression taut. "Commander," he said, voice controlled but edged with tension, "we've received intelligence of an enemy carrier task force moving to intercept our fleet. They're heavily armed and moving fast. My recommendation is a defensive posture. Pull the fleet back to safer waters and await reinforcements." Elena turned to him, eyes unwavering. "Sir, with respect, retreating now will isolate our transport vessels and SEAL teams. We risk casualties during withdrawal. I recommend maintaining position and executing a preemptive strike using our coordinated drone and missile network. It's calculated and maximizes our chances of neutralizing the threat with minimal risk to personnel." Ross's jaw tightened. "And you assume this will succeed where my defensive plan would at least keep us safe?" "Yes, sir," Elena replied calmly. "We are equipped, positioned, and our intel is real-time. Hesitation increases risk exponentially. The optimal solution is to strike first, precisely and decisively. I can coordinate the operation." There was a long pause. Ross stared at her, evaluating, calculating. His pride warred with reason. The woman he had tested, doubted, and even mocked had repeatedly demonstrated strategic brilliance. Yet the thought of allowing her plan to override his own instincts gnawed at him. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Fine. You have command for this operation. I expect a full report and 0 casualties." Elena gave a brief, respectful nod. "Understood, sir." "Let's execute." The next hour was a flurry of activity. Red Team SEALs, drones, missile units, and the fleet moved as a single coordinated force under Elena's direction. Her commands were precise, like the rhythm of a machine. Vector Adjustment 3. Air Support. Intercept hostile midline. SEAL teams. Maintain concealment. Activate electronic countermeasures. Missile units. Calibrate to Vector 9-5. Her mind calculated multiple contingencies simultaneously, anticipating enemy maneuvers before they could occur. The fleet responded with flawless precision, a reflection of her clear authority and prior meticulous planning. The enemy carrier task force emerged from the horizon, a wall of steel and firepower, sleek and menacing against the gray sea. There, drones swarmed forward, Missile launchers locked onto the fleet. Officers and sailors tensed, waiting for her command. Elana's fingers moved over the communication console, her eyes scanning every screen, processing every variable in real time. "Launch preemptive missile strike," she ordered, voice calm, unwavering. "Target hostile drones first, then the lead carrier. Air support, engage enemy flanks. Red team, cover positions remain. Maintain visual on all vectors." Explosions erupted on the horizon as missile and drone strikes struck the enemy. Smoke and fire painted the sky in jagged streaks. Elena's eyes never wavered from the screens. She monitored damage, assessed threats, and recalculated in seconds. One of the enemy drones broke through countermeasures and aimed directly for a transport ship. Elena reacted instantly. Redirect counter-drone unit to intercept Vector 6. Missile units, prepare backup strike. All crews, brace for evasive maneuvers. Seconds later, the drone was neutralized mid-air. A cheer erupted in the command center, but Elena remained focused, issuing follow-up instructions, ensuring no secondary threats compromised the fleet. Ross watched silently, jaw tight, heart pounding. He had trained countless men in countless scenarios, yet he had never witnessed command executed with such calm precision under fire. Elena didn't just give orders. She controlled chaos, bending it to her will, without panic, hesitation, or ego. The battle raged for nearly 2 hours. Missiles streaked across the night sky, drones engaged in aerial duels, and SEAL teams executed tactical maneuvers to neutralize smaller threats. Elena's mind never left the operation, anticipating enemy adaptations, redirecting units, and coordinating strikes that minimized exposure to friendly forces. Finally, the tide began to turn. The enemy carrier task force suffered significant losses, several vessels incapacitated, others retreating. The fleet held its formation, intact and operational, thanks entirely to Elena's foresight and precise command. When the last enemy drone was neutralized, Elena allowed herself a brief moment to exhale. Her fingers lingered over the console as she reviewed every unit's status, ensuring that no casualties had occurred. Red Team SEALs reported back, unharmed but exhilarated. Transport vessels were safe. The fleet had survived a night of fire and emerged victorious. Ross approached her quietly. For the first time, there was no sarcasm, no doubt, only a mixture of awe and respect. "Ward," he said, voice low, almost reverent, "I underestimated you." "Entirely. You didn't just save the fleet, you controlled the battlefield." "I can't remember the last time I witnessed such command under fire." Elena met his gaze evenly. "Sir, I only executed what was necessary. Lives were at stake, and the fleet depended on decisive action. That is the responsibility of command." Ross exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "You've done more than prove yourself. You've shown me and everyone here what leadership really looks like." The room around them began to settle. Officers reporting status, crews repairing minor damage, and communication channels restored. Elena, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, remained composed. Her focus had never been on recognition, only on results. She reviewed the battle logs, noting each decision, each vector adjustment, and each successful extraction. Her mind raced ahead, planning contingencies for any future engagement, ensuring the fleet remained secure. Leadership, she knew, was a continuous responsibility, never a momentary victory. Ross stood behind her, silent for a moment. He had spent his life testing men, breaking them down to build strength, but Elena had never needed breaking. She had met his tests with competence, strategy, and calm authority. And in doing so, she had earned the respect that many fought decades to achieve. "Commander," he said finally, a rare smile tugging at his lips. Consider tonight the moment you truly proved yourself to the fleet and to me. Elena inclined her head. Sir, the fleet's safety is all the proof I need. The night sky began to lighten as dawn approached. The storm of battle had passed, leaving the fleet intact, SEAL teams safe, and enemy forces in retreat. Elena stood silently on the deck, watching the first light shimmer across the water, her uniform marked with rain, sweat, and the evidence of relentless focus. She reflected briefly on the long hours, the decisions made under immense pressure, and the silent trust she had earned from men who had doubted her mere days ago. Leadership, she knew, was not about asserting authority. It was about earning it, moment by moment, decision by decision. Ross approached once more, quieter now, a tone of respect replacing sarcasm. Ward, he said, it seems I've misjudged the measure of command. You've done something none of us expected. And yet, perhaps, we should have. Elena allowed herself the slightest smile, a fleeting acknowledgement of the hard-won respect and trust she had earned. Tomorrow, new challenges would arise. But tonight, she had commanded with clarity, courage, and unmatched precision. The Pacific stretched before her, calm now, reflecting the golden hues of morning. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that no storm, no skepticism, and no adversary could break the command she had earned. Because true leadership wasn't about rank, title, or tradition. It was about competence, courage, and the unwavering willingness to act when it mattered most. And Commander Elena Ward had proven she possessed all three. The sun rose pale and cold over the horizon, casting long reflections across the calm, deceptively serene waters of the Pacific. After the harrowing night of fire, the fleet had regained its footing, but Elena Ward knew better than to assume the threat had passed. Intelligence reports indicated a new enemy formation moving in, this one larger, better coordinated, and more aggressive. Admiral Ross entered the command center, his expression taut, betraying the tension he usually concealed behind a mask of command. Ward, he said, voice clipped. Intelligence suggests this could be the decisive engagement. This is bigger than anything we've faced. We may have only one chance to neutralize the threat. Elena, standing before the fleet's operational map, eyes scanning vectors and strategic nodes, nodded calmly. Sir, we've prepared for this. I've identified multiple approaches for both offense and defense. If we execute precisely, we can neutralize the task force without unnecessary casualties. Ross hesitated. For decades, he had been the one making split-second decisions in impossible scenarios. Now, a younger commander, one he had initially doubted, was guiding the fleet's fate. Your plan assumes coordination across every unit, he said, voice low. One mistake, and we lose not just ships, but lives. Elena met his gaze without flinching. One mistake can be mitigated through preparation, sir. Hesitation increases risk. We act now decisively. Ross exhaled, a mixture of frustration and respect in his eyes. Then execute. Fleet command is yours. Within the hour, the fleet was in position. Elena's strategy was precise. SEAL teams would infiltrate key enemy vessels. Drone swarms would neutralize aerial threats, and missile units would strike with pinpoint accuracy. Every vector, every maneuver had been calculated, simulated, and cross-checked. The enemy task force appeared on the horizon, a formidable wall of steel, radar signatures lighting up across every display. Officers tensed. Some murmured doubts, others watched Elena silently, waiting for her next command. Red Team SEALs, she said, voice calm but authoritative. You have the lead insertion points. Maintain cover and follow coordinates Alpha 3. Air support. Engage flanking units. Missile units. Prepare for synchronized strike. Communications teams. Monitor all vectors and report deviations immediately. Her calmness in the eye of the storm had a tangible effect on everyone. Confidence replaced fear. Clarity replaced hesitation. The fleet responded with precision, each unit moving in concert under her command. The first engagement came almost immediately. Enemy drones swarmed toward the fleet, seeking to overwhelm defensive systems. Elena's voice cut through the tension. Deploy electronic countermeasures. Intercept Vector 4. Activate drone defense network. Maintain formation. Explosions and flashes of light streaked across the horizon as the drones were intercepted midair. One drone broke through the perimeter, but Red Team SEALs engaged with precision, neutralizing the threat before it could strike. Ross watched silently, fists clenched, realizing that every scenario he had trained for was being executed flawlessly by someone he had once doubted. Elena was not just leading, she was orchestrating a complex symphony of action, strategy, and timing. The enemy's lead vessel attempted a surprise maneuver, a high-speed flank aimed at the fleet's vulnerable center. Elena anticipated the move instantly. Missile units, Vector Adjustment 5-7. Air support, Intercept Vector 9. SEAL teams, maintain cover. Enemy flanking maneuver neutralized. The lead vessel erupted in flames as coordinated missile and drone strikes hit simultaneously. The enemy formation faltered, chaos rippling through their ranks. Elena's timing and coordination left no room for error. Ross exhaled slowly. He had faced countless crises, but he had never witnessed command executed with such precision under pressure. Her calm, unwavering demeanor had not just guided the fleet, it had inspired it. The battle intensified. Enemy vessels regrouped and attempted a coordinated counterattack, targeting transport ships and missile units. Elena's mind raced, calculating probabilities, anticipating moves, and adjusting strategy in real time. All units, defensive formation Gamma, she commanded. Intercept all vectors. Red Team, priority extraction points remain. Drone units, focus on aerial threats. Missile calibration Vector 10-2. Engage on my mark. The fleet responded with clockwork precision. Ships adjusted positions, drones intercepted incoming missiles, and SEAL teams remained concealed while providing critical reconnaissance. Elena's commands synchronized every element of the operation, leaving no gap for error. Then came the critical moment. One of the SEAL teams reported being pinned down on an enemy vessel. Communications were sporadic, and the team was under heavy fire. Ross instinctively reached for the override panel. Elena's voice cut through sharply. Admiral Ross, do not override. The plan is in motion. Any deviation now risks exposing the SEALs and disrupting fleet coordination. Trust the plan. Ross froze, tension in every muscle. Ego battled reason. Pride warred with the undeniable fact before him. Slowly, he exhaled and stepped back. For the first time, he placed full trust in her judgment. Seconds later, the SEAL team executed a flawless extraction under her direction. Enemy vessels were neutralized systematically. Drones engaged threats with surgical precision. The fleet maintained formation, unbroken and operational. The decisive moment arrived when Elena coordinated a final synchronized strike against the remaining enemy carriers. Missiles launched simultaneously, drones distracted, and SEAL teams infiltrated to ensure complete neutralization. Explosions lit the horizon, fire and smoke marking the culmination of the operation. By dawn, the enemy task force had been incapacitated. The fleet, intact and fully operational, had survived a night of relentless threat. Elena allowed herself a brief moment to exhale, reviewing every unit's status to ensure zero casualties. Ross approached her quietly, face lined with exhaustion and awe. "Ward," he said, voice low, "I've spent my life in command, training men for impossible scenarios. I've never witnessed anyone execute under pressure with such clarity and precision. "You've done something extraordinary tonight." Elena met his gaze evenly. "Sir, we only did what was necessary. The fleet's survival was the mission. Leadership is not about recognition, it's about results." Ross shook his head slowly, a rare expression of humility crossing his face. "You've earned respect not just from me, but from everyone here. And tonight, you've redefined it." Officers who had doubted her now moved with quiet reverence, understanding that Elena Ward's leadership had not just saved lives, it had earned trust, broken barriers, and proven her extraordinary capability. The ocean stretched calm before them, reflecting the first light of dawn. Explosions had faded, the battle won, and the fleet secure. Elena stood on the deck, rain-soaked, exhausted, yet unwavering, knowing that true leadership was measured in moments like these, under pressure, with lives at stake, and in the ability to act decisively when hesitation could mean disaster. Ross lingered beside her, finally acknowledging what he had long resisted. Elena Ward was not just a commander. She was a leader whose authority, skill, and courage were undeniable. The night's fire, chaos, and tension had been the ultimate test, and she had passed with unyielding precision, earning a respect that would echo through the fleet for years to come. As the sun rose fully over the Pacific, painting the fleet in golden light, Elena allowed herself the faintest, fleeting smile. The ultimate test had been met. The fleet had survived, the SEAL teams were safe, and Admiral Ross had finally acknowledged her authority. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities for leadership. But tonight, Elena Ward had proven one undeniable truth. Respect is earned through courage, clarity, and decisive action. And she had earned it in full. The sun rose high over the calm Pacific, casting glittering light across the fleet that had survived the night's onslaught. The chaos of battle was behind them, yet the memory of fire, smoke, and near misses still lingered in every officer's mind. Commander Elena Ward moved through the command center, reviewing status reports, ensuring that all units, ships, and SEAL teams were accounted for. Her uniform bore streaks of rain, sweat, and soot, silent testaments to the relentless night she had endured. Admiral Ross entered the center, eyes scanning the room with a mixture of pride and lingering disbelief. "Ward," he said quietly, voice measured, "the reports from last night are unprecedented. Never in my 35 years have I witnessed command executed with such precision and clarity." Elena met his gaze evenly. "Sir, the fleet's safety is all that matters. Every decision made was to protect personnel and accomplish the mission." Ross shook his head slowly. He had spent decades in the SEALs, commanding men under fire, testing their limits, and enforcing discipline. He had trained officers to think fast, to anticipate threats, and to make decisions that could mean life or death. And yet, Elena had done all of that, and more, without faltering, without hesitation, without ego. She had commanded a fleet, coordinated SEAL teams, neutralized threats, and emerged victorious. All before breakfast. "You've earned more than my respect," he admitted finally, voice low, almost reverent. "You've earned the trust of every officer and sailor here. More importantly, you've proven that leadership isn't defined by age, rank, or tradition. It's defined by action and competence. Today, you've shown everyone what true command looks like." Elena inclined her head, a faint acknowledgement of the rare praise. "Thank you, sir. I only did what was necessary." Ross studied her for a long moment, as if weighing whether to add more. Then he spoke, each word deliberate. "Effective immediately, you are recognized as Fleet Commander. You have full operational authority over the deployed units in this sector. Your leadership will be the standard by which all future operations are evaluated." The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Officers who had once whispered doubts or exchanged skeptical glances now looked at her with quiet admiration. Her calm, unyielding competence had not only survived the ultimate test, it had redefined what they believed possible. Elena's eyes flickered briefly to Ross. "Sir, with all due respect, I accept this responsibility not for recognition, but because the mission demands it. Lives depend on decisive leadership, and I intend to provide it." Ross nodded slowly. "Understood. And you have it, Commander. Full authority." The rest of the day was filled with debriefings, status reports, and commendations. Elena moved methodically, ensuring that every unit, every crew member, and every SEAL operative was accounted for and recognized. She avoided personal accolades, instead highlighting the collective effort of the fleet. Leadership, she understood, was not about taking credit, but about inspiring action and earning trust. Outside the command center, sailors and officers whispered among themselves. "Did you see her in action?" One remarked. "She didn't just coordinate. She controlled the battlefield." "She's something else," another said. "I've never seen anyone handle pressure like that." Even the Admiral deferred to her judgment. Elena overheard snippets of conversation, but didn't pause. She had learned long ago that respect is earned quietly, often without fanfare. And hers had been earned in spades. Later, Ross requested a private moment with her. The room was empty, save for the soft hum of electronics and the occasional distant echo of ship machinery. He regarded her with a mixture of pride and humility. "Ward," he began, voice quieter than usual, "I've spent my career testing officers, pushing them to their limits, breaking them down to build strength. I thought I had seen it all. And then you arrived. You didn't just meet the test, you rewrote it." Elena met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Sir, I've only done what was required. The mission comes first. That's the responsibility of command." Ross shook his head slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You've earned more than respect. You've earned the confidence of every man and woman under your command. And you've reminded me, sometimes the best leadership comes not from experience alone, but from clarity, courage, and decisiveness." The two stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the night's battles lingering in the air. Outside, the fleet glimmered in the afternoon sun, vessels moving in disciplined formation, drones patrolling the skies, and SEAL teams ready for deployment. Elena had earned not just authority, but trust, the most powerful currency in any military operation. As evening approached, Elena walked the decks of the flagship. Sailors greeted her with respect, some even smiling, a quiet acknowledgement of her leadership. She nodded politely, allowing herself a rare moment of satisfaction. The fleet was safe, operational, and inspired by her example. The SEAL teams, who had once doubted whether orders from a fleet officer could match the danger of field operations, now looked to her with confidence. The sunset painted the ocean in hues of gold and crimson, the waves reflecting the triumph of a fleet that had survived fire, chaos, and relentless pressure. Elena paused at the railing, the wind tugging at her uniform, and let herself reflect on the journey that had brought her here. From the skepticism of Ross and the whispers of doubt among officers to the ultimate test of command under fire, every challenge had been met with clarity, courage, and unyielding determination. She had proven not just her competence, but her capacity to lead decisively when lives were on the line. Ross joined her quietly, standing a respectful distance away. "Ward," he said softly, "tonight the fleet knows who truly commands. Not by rank, not by title, but by action. And you've shown us all what leadership looks like." Elena allowed herself a faint smile. "Thank you, sir. But the fleet's success is always a team effort. My role is to guide, to coordinate, and to ensure that every life is protected. That is the duty of command." Ross nodded, a mixture of respect and humility in his eyes. For the first time, he felt that the legacy of his command had been honored and expanded by someone who had surpassed even his expectations. As night fell, the fleet maintained its patrols, ready for any potential threats, but the tension had eased. Elena returned to her quarters briefly, reviewing reports and preparing for the next operation. Her body was tired, her mind alert, and her resolve unwavering. Leadership was never about comfort or recognition. It was about action, responsibility, and the courage to make decisions when the stakes were highest. A message from Ross appeared on her secure line. "Well done, Fleet Commander. The fleet owes you more than you realize." Elena allowed herself a brief, private smile. The journey had been long, the challenges immense, but she had earned what mattered most: trust, respect, and the authority to lead when it counted. Outside, the Pacific waves glimmered under the moonlight, calm yet powerful, a reflection of the fleet and the commander who had earned the right to guide it. Elena Ward stood at the helm of both ships and hearts, a leader who had faced fire, chaos, and skepticism, and emerged victorious. The story of the night, the battle, and the fleet commander herself would echo throughout the ranks for years to come. She had proven that true leadership transcends tradition, gender, and expectation. It is earned through action, decisiveness, and the unwavering commitment to protect those under one's command. And Commander Elena Ward had earned it completely, unequivocally, and forever.